I can honestly say with my hand on my heart, I've never had a Canon fail on a shoot for me, which says, and I've had a lot of other cameras fail, so.
Hello and welcome to Canon in Motion, our week of exclusive promotions on Canon products, which is pretty much one of our largest ever value add offers. This week at ProAV, each Canon product you buy will give you a value which you can spend towards anything on our tailored list of accessories, with all kinds of products on there. There's simple things like media and batteries, but there's also Flowtech tripods, on-camera monitors, lenses. The choice is yours. And today I'm talking to our good friend Bret Danton. Bret has been on this channel many times now, so I'm sure you all already know him well, but he's been using Canon for years, mainly directing commercials for broadcast delivery, but recently has taken on a fascinating VFX project with NVIDIA, which we're going to discuss in detail. Let's start by going over a little bit about your history with Canon. I mean, how long have you been using Canon now?
God, if I said how long I've been using Canon, I'd probably really age myself. I mean, I use their stills cameras because of my background stills photography. I mean, I used their 35mm stills cameras when they were film originally, but I really started to use Canon when they sort of produced the first digital camera of a pro grade, because what I was finding was at that time, I was shooting a lot of stuff with 5.4 film, medium format. Then I had medium format digital cameras. And at that period, they weren't the most reliable things on the face of the earth. They're also incredibly slow. Some of the quality was great, especially when you did four pixel capture or 4-shot capture, we used to call it. But Canon, for me, when they produced that first 35mm 1D, it just worked. And that's when I jumped across to starting to use Canon in the stills line of stuff. And because I knew Canon so well from stills is when I then moved into using their stuff for my motion, because I knew how they worked, I knew their color science. And coming from a stills background and jumping into motion, I already had a whole bag of lenses of Canon which I could use on the motion camera, which was a massive advantage.
I mean, you use a lot of Canon, so presumably the main reason you carry on using Canon is because you're so familiar with it and it's just become such an integrated part of your workflow. But what, apart from that, what do you think are the main reasons that keep you in that Canon ecosystem?
I mean, for me, the post side of it is certainly something. I've always found, handling the Canon files very easy. I've used other cameras that I've struggled with down the track. The build quality, I can honestly say with my hand on my heart, I've never had a Canon fail on a shoot for me, which says, and I've had a lot of other cameras fail. So, build reliability,
which is impressive because you've had a lot of Canon cameras.
I've had a lot of Canon cameras, and we have shot with them in some really tough situations. I mean, I've gone from the middle of, minus 20 in snow to plus 50 in the middle of a desert with fine sand blowing everywhere. I've never had a missed beat on a Canon. So that, for me, reliability. Colors are obviously another thing. And now, even more of late, one thing I'm really enjoying is the fact that the ecosystem, especially with the 300 and 500, is this modular system, and I know the cameras inside out. I know where everything is, and I can flip between those two cameras, and I know where all the buttons are. So it's familiarity is another big reason for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you with a brief sort of rundown of the Canon cameras of recent history that you have owned, but it might be easier to ask you which ones haven't you had a play with.
Oh, look, I mean, if I go through, actually my first motion camera that I used for Canon was the 1DC, which I absolutely love. That camera, I still have one in the cupboard. It's a great camera. I mean, I still think that Motion JPEG produced a great file. And that was the first full frame, camera, the digital camera that I'd ever used. And I fell in love with full frame then. From there, I moved to the C500 Mark 1, and we used to shoot a lot of RAW on it. Still has a great image, that camera. It's bulletproof. And then I moved to C700, been through all the flavors of the 700. C500 is now my main, C500 Mark II beast here is now my main camera, go-to camera. And I've been, quite often now in the last few jobs I've had a couple of C500 Mark IIs and the C300 as a B camera.
So on those sort of car commercial style projects that you were talking about, you've done quite a lot of in recent years. It's the C500 that is your go-to now, is it?
C500 Mark II is, yeah, definitely my go-to with that full frame. The 700 full frame I love, and what I really enjoy with the 700 full frame is, you know, you've got all the different connections, so you can run out a whole lot of different you know, monitor feeds, SDI feeds. You know, the panel on the side of it I find really quick. So I've used the 700 quite a bit, funnily enough, when I shoot talent, because it's a very fast camera and it is geared up to have a camera operator side to the camera as well, so they can see exactly what's going on. So, and it's a very good camera to balance on your shoulder. A lot of people think it's heavy, but because of the extra length to it, you know, you can get it on your shoulder and really move it around. So that's what I enjoy with it. Where I'm finding, and what I find with that camera is I've shot that camera, funnily enough, a lot in XFAVC, which I think, you know, especially when you're shooting the full frame and you go down to the XFAVC, it's a really, really clean file. What I like with the 500 Mark II though is I really enjoy the cinema raw light. I mean, I think that's a fantastic codec.
I mean, with those projects that you've been doing on the C500, I mean, what percentage do you reckon you've been using the 5.9K RAW versus the internal XFAVC?
On everything of lately, I've only used 5.9K RAW.
Only, so 100%?
100%, yeah. Yeah. We did some proxy recordings, and that's probably it. And that we used, you know, to send up to clients to view via Frame.io.
So let's talk a little bit about this recent project that you've been doing with NVIDIA then, because I mean, it's a complex project. We might have to break it down in very simple terms for me to understand what it is, to be quite honest with you. But it sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, so basically what it went back to was a lot of the stuff that you see, obviously, I mean, Unreal Engine, it's, you know, it's got a great look, but in my opinion, and, you know, I'll probably cop a bit of flack for this, I still think it has a bit of a games engine look about it. And it's not even so much that, it's even when it comes down to things like asset creation. I mean, you're building it inside a virtual world, so stuff looks a little bit, and the human mind is so clever at picking up oddities and realizing something's not in the right place, and it almost becomes too perfect. It almost becomes, I mean, I call it, like, there's a forest scene, I call it the enchanted forest. Yes, it looks amazing, but there's something at the back of your mind that's telling you it's not real. So what we did was
uncanny valley situation.
Yeah, exactly. And the you know, your mind is really, it can really pick up those details without you realizing it, and especially your eye. I mean, we are defined very easily on that side of stuff. So what we decided to do was, there's a gentleman that I've worked with, a guy called Perry Nightingale, who's an absolute computer whiz kid. I mean, his knowledge is unbelievable. So what we did was we actually LiDAR scanned in a forest. Now, we went a little bit overboard because this was a bit of a research project to see what would happen. But we got all the correct ground topography. We scanned in 22 billion points of information and produced an OBJ file, which was, I think it was 212 gig, which could only be opened by a supercomputer in the cloud. And then we actually used photogrammetry to then populate that LiDAR scan. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of work done to it since, but what it did was it gave us the complete correct topography of the ground. So what we ended up doing was we basically moved around inside the LiDAR scan to plan out our TVC, chopped those sections out of this massive scan that we had, and then actually recreated those inside a 3D environment using that information that we've got. And what we've got back looks real. And then inside, using Omniverse rather than Unreal Engine, we used path tracing, ray tracing, and that gave us the look of real light. So that the way the light is moving across the scene, when it's rendered, it looks real. So that in a nutshell is what we did. We then also went into a little bit more of research with the screens, and we tested a whole lot of screens from 2.5 pixel pitch, which is what a lot of people are using, which is obviously a leftover from events industry, because funnily enough, there's quite a few of them sitting around, all the way to mini LED screens with a 1.5 pixel pitch. A lot more expensive, a lot newer technology, but what we discovered was that you could focus pretty much sharply on those screens, which you can't do on the 2.5 because you get a moire pattern coming in.
So how did the physical camera come into this? How did the Canon camera that you were using, what part of the process was that used in?
So we used it because what we've discovered is that although you're building this massive, basically forest in a 3D, you still need traditional cinema photography at the beginning, to set the scenes or to use the scenes. So we used the Canon to actually capture all of our initial scenes. We then use that to information or the look of the Canon to actually build the forest. And then when we've gone to the XR stage, we've then used the Canon again. So we've shot all the action. Basically, we've done the tests, but we're about to do in the next couple of months quite a big shoot using the Canons on the XR stage.
And so this is for the technology that we've been seeing on sort of shows like the Mandalorian for the LED wall right behind them.
Yeah, so I mean, we were really lucky. This project was actually featured alongside Mandalorian at the GTC in the Jensen's keynote speech from NVIDIA.
It's definitely a technology that I think the entire sort of industry, really, from commercials to narrative work like The Mandalorian, is all looking at quite avidly at the moment, because it could really open up a lot of potential. And obviously the best use cases we've seen for that so far have been in a very fantasy sort of sci-fi world where you can probably get away with quite a bit more of that uncanny valley that you were talking about.
Yes, and you notice that from the productions that have been using it. So, that obviously, as you said, a lot of them are things, and especially a lot of them are things like desert scenes, which render quite, they render up quite well. And then, a lot of nighttime-y neon-looking sort of cityscapes. That's that side of stuff, yes, but we want to try to take it into a reality world. And this isn't going to be just led by the way that we actually want to shoot or the way people want to shoot. This is going to be led by companies demanding it because of things like a carbon footprint. Because, basically what we were able to do is, we can finish a TVC in the studio. We didn't have to send 50 people to a forest in Scotland. And have them up there for 3 weeks, which we probably would have done. We sent six people up there, captured it like that, and they were up there for a week. So the environmental impact was much smaller. And that's what clients are going to start to want to look towards as well. When you get into the studio, obviously you can change your lighting, you can change everything. So your speed of shooting is a lot quicker as well.
So obviously a huge part of the C500 Mark II and where that sits within Canon's lineup is its large format sensor. It's sort of larger than full frame sensor. Is that something that is really important to your work?
Yeah, having run a few camera tests and tested different lenses, my conclusion was yes, you really need to shoot on a full frame sensor inside these XR stages. It reduces things like moire or almost eliminates them. Is number one. You get a much better use of lenses. If you do need to drop out focus, you can achieve it. So I think it's critical to be on a full frame camera, which is where the 500 Mark II is obviously completely crucial for this.
So that's interesting. So even though you are a very prolific user of Canon cameras and you have used them on the vast majority of work, because this is so different, you did actually go back and do those more traditional camera tests to make that decision.
We felt you had to, because there are other cameras people are calling the benchmark, and I didn't want to just jump in and say I'm using Canon because I use Canon. So we tried three different types. So actually, I think on the shoot we had 4 cameras that we tested, to see what they were all like and compare them all. And we also had a different range of lenses as well. So
what were the main differences that jumped out after doing those tests?
For me, the main thing, one of the things that the Canon did was you have to gen lock in to everything. The Canon gen locked in the simplest out of all of the cameras. One of the cameras we couldn't get to gen lock. The other one, we had some issues with gen locking. The Canon jumped in there really easily on the gen lock, but the colors as well, because it's a really weird thing is what I found, especially when you've got a HDR screen behind you. your eyes look at it, and what you're almost trying to do is create it so it looks like an environment. What I found was that when you then start looking back on your monitors, what you're seeing on the screen can be completely different to what the camera is recording. So I found the colors in the Canon to be the best from what we were recording once we graded it back in HDR. There was another camera that was very close that, you know, I'd be happy to work with, but, you know, working inside it, and also as well the size. I mean, the beauty of an XR stage, you want to be able to move that camera. You know, you should be able to hand hold it and move around with it. And with the 500, you can do that really nicely.
So moving forward into the next couple of years of your work and any upcoming projects that you might have, what sort of cameras do you think you're going to be pushing towards for those? Are you going to stick with the C500 or maybe dabbling in some of the rest of the ecosystem?
I mean, I think the C500 will stay as my main camera, my A camera. But I mean, you know, we've got a couple of commercials that we've looked at or are on the cards. That, you know, I'll probably look at, you know, maybe using an R5 and shooting RAW on that and mixing it all in. And that's what I'm really enjoying with the Canon ecosystem is, you know, you're not just locked into, you've got all of this plethora of choice. And I was thinking about this earlier because it's quite funny. You read forums and people say, oh, you know, I've bought this camera, but it doesn't do this and doesn't do that. And I was thinking back to my days when I used to shoot stills and film. I always had 3 different camera systems. I had a 5.4 system, I had a medium format system, and a 35. And I pulled out whichever one was right for the job. And that's what, you know, what I can do with the Canon. But then I know the colors will all work together. I know I can swap those lenses around. You know, I've got a bag of Canon stills lenses, Canon Cine primes, and it's like mix and match. So I'm not getting dictated to by my camera system what I can and can't do. You know, what I'm hoping to be able to do is we might shoot the main action with a 500, we might shoot the people with a 500, get that full frame look. Then the stuff that's probably high speed or needs faster, I'll go back to the C300. And then, you know, there's going to be some action stuff probably inside cars, maybe some stuff where the camera's going to be in a slightly more dangerous position. And I'd probably go down to an R5 for that. So I've got all of this ecosystem that I can mix together to get the shots that I want.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been nice to chat.
Great to see you. Hopefully we'll see each other again in person at some stage, Carl.
Fingers crossed.